Why don't you just disappear?" The words hit me like a slap across the face, sharp and unrelenting. In that moment, the world seemed to freeze around me. How could a child say such a thing? And worse, how could my wife, the woman I thought I had built a life with, remain silent before finally agreeing? It felt as though the ground beneath me was crumbling, leaving me with nothing but empty space and painful truths. It was a Sunday morning, a day that should have been filled with warmth and family. But instead the house was eerily quiet, a quiet that felt wrong. As I stepped into the living room, I immediately noticed something unsettling. The family photos, the cherished moments that had captured our life together, were all wrong. They hadn't been removed, they had been altered. I walked closer to the photo above the fireplace, the one from our trip to Yellowstone last summer. There it was, the photo still hanging, but something was missing. It was me. Every single picture of me had been carefully removed. It was as if my presence in this family had been erased, as though the last 3 years, the memories we had created together, no longer mattered. I stood there, coffee growing cold in my hand, staring at the hollow gaps in the frames when I heard it. Stella's footsteps, soft, deliberate, pausing at the top of the stairs. It was clear she knew I was awake. After a brief hesitation, she descended, phone in hand, deliberately avoiding my gaze. She walked past me without saying a word. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. The silence that followed hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken tension. 3 years. 3 years of trying to be a father to Stella, trying to be there for her without overstepping, without pushing. 3 years of shared movie nights, math homework, and small moments of connection. But now at 16, she had started pulling away, as if everything we had built together meant nothing. I had expected rebellion. It's part of growing up. But this felt different. It started last week. I had offered to help her with her chemistry project, thinking it was just a subject she struggled with. But when I offered my help, the response hit me like a punch to the gut. "Stop pretending you care about my grades. You're not my real dad." I had heard variations of that before, but this time it felt different. The tone in her voice was sharp, deliberate. It cut deeper than anything she had ever said before. Delilah, my wife, was in the kitchen and had likely heard, but she said nothing. And in that silence, I felt the walls go up. The tension between Stella and me grew, small things at first. Dishes left in the sink, doors slammed a little too hard, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. And Delilah, she pulled away too, deflecting whenever I tried to talk to her about it. "It's just her being a teenager, Thomas," Delilah would say. "Don't make it about you." But it wasn't just about me. It was about us, the family we were supposed to be. The next morning, everything felt off. The house, once filled with laughter and the soft hum of family life, was eerily quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that comforted you, like a peaceful Sunday morning. No, this silence felt heavy, suffocating, as if something unspeakable had already happened, but no one was ready to say it out loud. I walked into the kitchen, and the first thing I noticed was the way the sunlight filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the room. But the shadows weren't what disturbed me. It was the stillness. I looked at the counter, the table where we used to sit together, but today, everything felt out of place. Even the familiar scent of morning coffee seemed muted, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I took my cup of coffee and walked over to the living room. The family photos that used to line the walls, telling the story of our life, now stared back at me like ghosts of a past I no longer recognized. Every picture I had been in was gone, carefully replaced with others where I was nowhere to be seen. It felt like being erased, not just from the photographs, but from the family itself. I approached the large frame above the fireplace, the one from our trip to Yellowstone last summer. I remembered how we had laughed, how we had marveled at the geysers together, all of us bundled up in the cool mountain air. That photo was still there, but when I looked closer, I realized I wasn't in it. Not in the picture of our perfect family, not in the memory that was supposed to be ours. My stomach tightened as I stood there, feeling the weight of the absence. I heard footsteps upstairs, soft, deliberate, but unmistakably Stella's. She paused at the top of the stairs, no doubt aware that I was up. After a brief hesitation, she made her way down. Her phone was in her hand, and she didn't look at me. She avoided my gaze, her movements stiff, purposeful. "Morning," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't respond. The silence between us was like a physical presence in the room, thick with unspoken words and emotions that neither of us could find the courage to voice. For a moment I wondered how we had gotten here. 3 years. 3 years of trying to be the father Stella needed. 3 years of movie nights, of offering help with homework, of being there in small ways that I thought mattered. But now I was no longer welcome. I thought back to the last few months, how Stella had started withdrawing from me, from everything that had once felt natural between us. I had expected this to be typical teenage rebellion, the kind that every parent faces at some point. But this was different. It wasn't just that she was pulling away. It felt like she was intentionally pushing me out. The first sign came when I offered to help her with her chemistry project. She had been struggling with it, and I thought maybe I could make a difference, offer some support. But when I mentioned it, she snapped. "Stop pretending you care about my grades. You're not my real dad." The words stung, even though I had heard variations of them before. But this time, they were different. They were sharper, more deliberate. I glanced toward the kitchen, where Delilah was preparing breakfast. She must have heard Stella's words, but she didn't say anything. Her silence felt like a betrayal, a choice to stay neutral when, in that moment, I needed her to choose me. I needed her to stand up for me, for our family. But she didn't. Instead, she simply said, "She's just being a teenager, Thomas. Don't make it about you." It wasn't just about me. It was about us, about our family. But Delilah didn't see it that way. She was too wrapped up in her own fear, her own uncertainty, and I was left standing there alone. That silence from Delilah, the way she chose to stay out of it, only made the tension worse. It felt like the final straw, the moment that made me realize that the family I had worked so hard to build was slipping through my fingers. One day, Stella was my little girl, laughing at my stupid jokes. The next, she was pushing me away, telling me that I didn't belong. And then, last night, it all exploded. Dinner had been quiet, everyone on edge. Stella was texting, which was against our rules. I gently reminded her, and she snapped. "God, why are you always policing everything I do? Why can't you just leave me alone?" I looked at Delilah, hoping for some kind of support, but instead she put down her fork and quietly said, "Maybe we'd all be better off if you did." Her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. 3 years of memories, of laughter, of bonding, of love. All of it reduced to nothing more than hollow words. My chest tightened. I stood up, barely able to process the pain, and simply said, "Okay." And that was it. Just like that, I was ready to leave. I didn't know what to expect after I said those words. Okay. It wasn't a cry of defeat. It wasn't anger. It was just a decision that was made in the silence of the moment. The kind of silence that fills your chest with a weight that you can't explain. Stella didn't look at me. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. I could feel her anger radiating through the walls, as if everything she had been feeling for months was now pouring out in that single, decisive moment. Delilah, too, stood there, her eyes brimming with something I couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe, or relief. I turned around and walked slowly up the stairs. The house felt colder now, as though the warmth of the family I had once felt so connected to had faded away. As I gathered my things, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt numb, as if my decision had already been made long before the argument even started. I packed my duffel bag, carefully folding my clothes as I heard their voices downstairs, low, urgent whispers. But no one came up. No one came to stop me. Delilah never came to say, "Wait, don't go." She didn't try to talk it through, to make sense of what had just happened. It was just silence, and that silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. When I came down the stairs, I could hear Stella's footsteps retreating, probably back to her room. But Delilah was standing in the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked at me, her face an unreadable mask. "So you're just leaving?" Her voice was quiet, but there was a sharp edge to it, like she was trying to understand my decision, or maybe trying to convince herself that I wasn't really going to follow through with it. "You said we'd all be better off," I said, glancing at her as I grabbed my keys and wallet. "I'm respecting that." The words were simple, but they were final. There was no anger in them, no bitterness, just a quiet acceptance. Her eyes flashed, and for a moment I saw the fight in her. The words she had said to me, those words that had hurt more than anything Stella had said, had finally broken something inside her. But she didn't speak. Instead, she looked away, and the moment passed like an unspoken agreement. "I'll be at Ryan's," I said. "I'll figure something else out later." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The damage had already been done. As I stepped out the door, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't relief. It wasn't freedom. It was something else, something unsettling. I wasn't sure if it was the right decision. Maybe it wasn't. But it was the only decision I could make in that moment. Ryan, my friend, didn't ask questions when I showed up at his door. He never did. He just took one look at me, saw the exhaustion in my eyes, and set up the guest room without a word. I'm lucky to have a friend like him, someone who never questions, never judges, just lets you be. I didn't want to talk about it, not yet. So I turned off my phone, grabbed a sleeping pill from my emergency stash, and fell into a restless sleep, hoping that when I woke up, everything would feel a little clearer. But it didn't. The next morning, I woke up to the blaring sound of notifications on my phone. 13 missed calls, 8 from Delilah, 3 from Stella, 2 from Quinn, my sister, 27 text messages, 4 voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Sitting there in Ryan's guest room, I stared out the window at the morning traffic below. My mind was still spinning, still trying to piece together what had just happened. I knew there was more to it, more that I hadn't understood yet. But one thing was for sure. I couldn't go back. Not now. Not until I knew what was truly going on, and until I understood why everything had fallen apart so suddenly. As my phone buzzed again, I saw Stella's name on the screen. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to pick it up. Part of me wanted to scream, but another part of me, the part that was still hurting, was just too tired. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't walking away, it's knowing whether you should walk back. The next few days passed in a haze. I didn't hear from Delilah. Not really. There were a few text messages, each more apologetic than the last, but they never seemed to reach me. They were like empty words on a screen. No warmth, no understanding. I stayed at Ryan's for a few days, trying to put some distance between myself and the chaos. I needed time to think, time to breathe. But it wasn't easy. Every time I looked at my phone, I felt that familiar tug. A pull to check the messages, to see if maybe, just maybe, someone would understand. But I didn't respond. Not yet. Then one morning over breakfast, Ryan dropped a bombshell. "Miles is back in town," he said, sliding his phone across the table. Miles, Stella's biological father, the man who had been absent for most of her life, the man who had promised to be there for her and then disappeared, leaving nothing but empty promises and broken trust in his wake. He was the one who had hurt Stella more than anyone, the one who had let her down when she needed him the most. I felt a tightness in my chest as I looked at the photo on Ryan's phone. Miles, looking smug, tagged at a restaurant in town 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. How could he just waltz back in like nothing had happened? How could he show up now, after all this time? The timing was no coincidence. It never was with Miles. And suddenly, everything that had been happening with Stella, the tension, the distance, the hurtful words, all started to make sense. I scrolled through my texts again. Delilah's messages had shifted from angry to concerned. "Please just let us know you're okay," she had texted. "There's something you need to know. It's Stella. Please call me." I didn't reply, but then my sister Quinn showed up around lunch. She walked into Ryan's place with her usual no-nonsense attitude, a cup of coffee in hand. "You look like hell," she said, dropping onto the couch. "Thanks, sis," I muttered, forcing a smile. Quinn didn't smile back. She had that look in her eyes, the one that said she knew something was up, and she wasn't going to leave until she got to the bottom of it. "I ran into Stella yesterday," she said, sitting up straight. "At the mall." My stomach dropped. Stella. What was she doing? Was she really seeing Miles? Quinn continued, her eyes narrowing as she watched my reaction. "She didn't see me, but I saw her. She was with Miles." My heart raced. "What is he telling her now?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Quinn took a deep breath, then pulled out her phone, showing me a post from Stella's Instagram. It was a picture of her sitting at a cafe with Miles, her biological father, captioned, "Real family time." The comment section was filled with hearts and supportive messages from her friends, all of them oblivious to the years of pain Stella had endured because of him. I couldn't help it. My blood boiled. "How can she be so blind?" I muttered. "How can she fall for this again?" Quinn didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched me with a knowing expression, her lips pursed. "I ran into her again. She told me he's been messaging her for months," Quinn said, her voice soft. "He's been promising to make things right. He's making her believe that he's changed, that he's really going to be the father he should have been all along." I felt my anger rise. Not at Stella. No, she was just a kid. She was searching for something she had been denied her whole life. My anger was for Miles, for how he had come back into our lives, weaving his lies, taking advantage of Stella's vulnerability once again. I looked at Quinn, feeling the weight of everything on my shoulders. "Something's wrong," I said, my voice tight. "This isn't just about Stella. It's about Miles. He's using her again." Quinn nodded, a serious look in her eyes. "I know," she said, "but it's not just about her. It's about you, too, about what you're going to do next." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I could fix this. But as the minutes passed, something inside me began to shift. It wasn't just about walking away anymore. It was about taking action. It was about protecting Stella from making the same mistake she'd made before. I grabbed my phone and began scrolling through the messages from Delilah. The last one was simple, but heart-wrenching. "Please, Thomas, call me. It's about Stella." I took a deep breath. The silence had gone on long enough. "All right," I said, standing up. "I'm going to call her." I couldn't wait any longer. I dialed Delilah's number, the phone vibrating in my hand like it knew what I was about to do. It rang a few times before she answered, her voice strained, like she had been waiting for this moment. "2. Thomas," she said, her voice soft. "I'm glad you called." I felt a lump form in my throat, the weight of everything I'd been holding inside pressing against me. But I had to say it. I had to be honest. "I need to know what's going on, Delilah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What is Stella doing with Miles? Why is she letting him back in after everything he's done?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Delilah's breath catch before she spoke again, her words quiet but filled with regret. "I tried to keep them apart, Thomas. I really did. But she's so desperate to believe that he's changed, that he can be the father she's always wanted. I didn't know what to do anymore." I swallowed hard, trying to process what she was saying. "You should have told me, Delilah. You should have told me everything." I could feel the hurt rising in my chest again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just anger. It was a deep sadness that seemed to come from the very core of everything I had believed in. "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I was scared that if I told you, you would leave. That if I didn't side with Stella, she would pull away from me too." "I'm not mad at you, Delilah," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not. But we can't let her fall for this again. He's using her. He's manipulating her, and we can't just stand by and let it happen." Delilah didn't respond right away, but I could feel her nodding on the other end of the line, as if she were finally understanding what I had been trying to say all along. "I know," she whispered. "I know. But I didn't know how to fix it, how to make it better." I took a deep breath, closing my eyes as I tried to find the right words. "It's not about fixing it, Delilah. It's about being there for Stella. It's about showing her that we're here for her, no matter what. It's about helping her see the truth, even if it's hard." There was another long silence, and I could feel Delilah struggling with everything that had happened. "I'll talk to her," Delilah finally said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'll tell her everything. I'll make sure she understands the truth about Miles." I nodded, the tightness in my chest easing just a little. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe, just maybe, we could help Stella before it was too late. Later that day, after hanging up with Delilah, I sat quietly, thinking about everything that had happened, about how I had been pushed away, how Stella had distanced herself, and how Delilah had chosen to stay silent. But in the end, we were still a family. A family that was broken, yes, but still a family. I thought about the lessons I had learned over the years, the importance of trust, of love, of being there for each other no matter what. But more than anything, I realized that sometimes the hardest thing isn't walking away. It's coming back. It's picking up the pieces, even when they don't fit perfectly. It's being willing to face the truth, no matter how painful it is. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Stella would listen, if Delilah would be able to reach her, or if I would ever fully be able to repair the damage that had been done. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to give up. Not on Stella, not on our family. And that was a lesson worth fighting for. The days that followed weren't easy, but they were a step toward something, toward healing, toward reconciliation. I wasn't sure where things would end up, or even if they would ever be the same again. But I knew that the hardest conversations often began with the smallest steps, and sometimes those steps felt impossible. It was a week later when Delilah and I finally sat down with Stella. The conversation didn't start with accusations or anger. It started with vulnerability, something we had both avoided for far too long. "Stella, I know you're hurting," Delilah said, her voice gentle. "I know you've been let down, and I understand why you want to believe that Miles has changed, but we need to face the truth together." Stella didn't speak for a long time. She just stared at the floor, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. But eventually, she looked up, her eyes filled with uncertainty and sadness. "I thought he would change," she whispered. "I thought he really cared this time." I could hear the raw pain in her voice, the vulnerability that was hidden beneath the anger she had been holding on to. She had wanted so desperately to believe in him, to believe in the idea of a family she never had. But the truth was there. Miles hadn't changed. He was still the same man who had hurt her, and she couldn't see it until now. "That's why we're here, Stella," I said softly. "To help you see that you don't have to keep chasing someone who doesn't deserve your trust. You've got us, we're your family, and no matter what, we'll always be here for you." It wasn't a perfect moment. There were no grand declarations or immediate fixes, but it was real. For the first time in weeks, I saw the faintest flicker of hope in Stella's eyes. She wasn't fully convinced, not yet, but she was starting to see what was important, what truly mattered. The next few days were quieter, but there was a new sense of understanding between us. Stella began to talk more openly about her feelings, and for the first time, Delilah and I listened, not just as parents, but as people who were willing to learn from our mistakes. Stella decided to cut ties with Miles for good. She pulled her photos with him out of the album and packed them away, symbolically letting go of the past. She apologized for pushing me away, and for the things she had said, even though I told her there was nothing to apologize for. We were family, after all. It wasn't the happy ending I had once hoped for, but it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild the trust that had been broken, a chance to heal the wounds, both old and new. That night, as we sat together for dinner, the three of us, the real family, shared a simple meal. Nothing fancy, no grand gestures, just us. And in that moment, as I watched Stella laugh, her eyes lighting up for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we had found our way back to each other. Life wasn't perfect. But as I looked at my family, the people I loved, I understood one thing. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just seeing someone face consequences. It's thriving despite the pain. It's healing, growing, and moving forward together. And as I smiled, hearing Stella talk about her plans for college, I knew one thing for certain. This was the real family, and nothing could ever change that.